This is Total Retail Tech Insights.
The content retail executives need to optimize their use of technology throughout their organizations.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of Total Retail Tech Insights. I'm Joe Keenan, the editor-in-chief of Total Retail, and I'm pleased to be joined on today's show by Paul Paradis, who is the president of Sezzle. I'm excited to talk with Paul about Sezzle, which is, if those not familiar, it's a leader in the buy now, pay later arena and all the great work it's doing with its retail clients and what is to come from Sezzle. And so really looking forward to the conversation. And I want to thank you for joining me today, Paul.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. And I hope I can provide some valuable nuggets for your listeners. Yeah.
So I just gave a very, very brief introduction, but you're the expert here. I'd love for you to tell us about Sezzle. I mentioned that the company operates in the buy now, pay later landscapes. Tell us a little bit about that and how the business really differentiates itself.
Yeah, happy to. So Sezzle is a point of sale installment financing company. It's become known as buy now, pay later. I think that term got picked up, probably 6-8 years ago with the rise of companies like Sezzle and Afterpay and Affirm and others. But we started the company because of the decline in credit card adoption that we saw among young consumers. And we initially thought it was a choice that consumers were moving away from credit cards toward debit cards. And so we launched a debit rewards platform, but didn't see the type of traction that we wanted to see early on. And so we ended up pivoting to buy now, pay later after realizing that it was really more due to a lack of access to credit than it was a preference or a choice. And this was back in 2017. We saw BNPL taking off in Australia and thought that could be applied here in the US, that the same consumer demand existed. So we were the first to launch Pay in 4 in the US back in 2017, which essentially enables a consumer to buy something and spread the cost over 4 interest-free installments. The industry's grown by leaps and bounds over the last 5-6 years. I think I saw 8% of Amazon's Prime Day sales this year were processed by buy now, pay later providers. So pretty staggering when you consider that it was really just launched, less than 10 years ago. And how we differentiate from our competitors is we cater to a younger, more subprime consumer. And there's a few reasons for that. We're the only buy now, pay later that supports building credit history when used. So we have a program called Sezzle Up that's optional for consumers. Once they've completed a purchase with Sezzle, we market the ability to opt into that program. And there's about 500,000 of our customers that have opted in. It's shown to improve credit scores by an average of 20 points in the first 4 months. And for many of our customers in that program, it's their only reported credit line or credit item. So that's a big one for us. We're also able to approve more orders than other providers and underwrite deeper into the credit spectrum, including about 18% of our customers that have no credit history at all. And it's because we tend to charge more fees than our competitors in certain circumstances. And that might sound like a bad thing, but we still provide a free path for consumers that pay on time, but it enables us to serve more customers. When we charge more fees, we can absorb more losses. And so that allows us to approve more orders. About half of our customers say they've been declined by other BNPLs. So it's just allowing us to provide more access. And then finally, we want to be really where our customer initiates their shopping journey, not just an installment lender. So we've added a ton of features and functionality to our app that really have nothing to do with lending, but, include a product marketplace with price comparison across retailers, auto couponing similar to Honey. So we've added a lot of really cool features to our customers around shopping so that, when they want to buy something or need to buy something, we're the first place they think of to go and buy it.
So I appreciate that. I think that provides a level of context for the audience as we're going to continue our conversation. And with that in mind, I always like to talk to my guests and learn a little bit more about them as well, in addition to the organizations they work for. In kind of my preparation for this interview, I noticed that you've been with Sezzle for nearly 10 years. So quite a run at the organization. Maybe tell us a little bit about your journey, your career journey, and what led you to Sezzle. And obviously, you've been there for quite a while. So tell us a little bit about your current role.
Sure. I started the company with our CEO, like you said, almost 10 years ago. He and I met in business school at the University of Minnesota back in '08 to 2010. We were going to business school right during the Great Recession, which was a pretty interesting time to be in business school. But my background, I'm from Minnesota, grew up in the Twin Cities area, went to school down in North Carolina at Davidson College, which most people probably know of through Steph Curry. I was there a little bit before Steph Curry. But my first job out of college was with the Minnesota Timberwolves, the NBA team, where I was selling season tickets and suites. Spent about 2 years there, wanted to get into marketing, but was having trouble transitioning into a marketing job, having no marketing experience. So that's when I chose to go back to school to get my MBA, and where I met Charlie, our CEO. I ended up spending about 6 years in the consulting world, post-MBA, working for a couple of boutique firms focused on change management for large-scale ERP implementations. So spent a good amount of time around technology, never in payments though, or retail. And Charlie ended up starting a company out of grad school called Passport, which is a payments company in the parking space. So if you've ever parked on street in a city and paid via mobile app, that's the kind of work that Passport does. And so Charlie started that company back in, I guess it would have been around 2010, and got it through Series B, and it was a very successful company. He left that company in 2015 with a new idea in mind around bringing rewards to ACH payments, leveraging new debit technology like Plaid and Yodlee that would allow for instant authentication of bank accounts and checkout. Called me up and asked if I wanted to help him start the company. And, he's more of the product and engineering background, and I've always been more on the sales and marketing side. So we were a great fit to start the company together. And I've always led the business development side of our business, sales, marketing, strategic partnerships, customer support. I inherited a few years ago. And that's still what I do today, is lead those teams.
So I, as a college basketball fan, certainly familiar with Davidson and Bob McKillop and know all about that. And Steph Curry, obviously, but we won't go down that road. We could talk college hoops for a long time. Stick to the business conversation today. One of the things you mentioned in your previous answer was kind of the consumer demand continuing to grow for buy now, pay later. It's kind of moved from this kind of fringe offering for many retailers to now it's become mainstream and almost expected by shoppers, particularly younger shoppers. So with that in mind, can you talk a little bit about if there are any kind of still misunderstandings or misconceptions that retailers have about buy now, pay later? What don't they know yet that would be worth them knowing about the service?
Yeah, I think, many retailers think that it's just for young customers, like you were starting to describe a little bit, or just for lower income shoppers. But we're starting to see trends in the data that really push against those notions. Many BNPL users are college educated, they're employed, and they use BNPL as a budgeting tool. It's not necessarily a last resort, or they don't necessarily need it or use it because they need it, but they like the transparency and the ease of use around, I can buy this and it's spread out over time for me. And these payments are collected automatically from my bank account or from my debit card. And I don't have to remember when to pay, how much to pay. There's a lot of really complex interest calculations with credit card APRs that people don't want to have to go through. So for many, it's just a convenience thing. And, I think I saw payments, the media outlet, they do a lot of kind of payments analysis and research. They reported that 70% of US consumers have used a pay later solution in the last 3 months. So it's really starting to expand to the masses. And 82% of people who have earned over $100,000 a salary have used BNPL in the last 3 months. So it's moving to different generations. Certainly millennials and Gen Z are the largest generational cohorts that still use Sezzle, but we see every generational cohort use Sezzle, and all types of credit, anywhere in the credit spectrum, any type of household income are using buy now, pay later because there's really no reason not to. It's like, why not take interest-free financing when it's available?
So I want to follow up with regards to that younger shopper that you've alluded to, in particular Gen Z and even millennials, I guess, to a certain extent. Should retailers know about their financial behaviors, their habits, and how that might impact their payment strategy for the retailer? Obviously, customer acquisition is paramount for so many retailers, and filling that pipeline with younger customers that could potentially be long-term loyal customers, high lifetime value is a key performance indicator for so many. So talk a little bit about Gen Z, their financial habits, and how that potentially influences payment strategies at retailers.
Yeah. So, I think Gen Z is the second largest cohort to millennials. Millennials are the largest still for us, even though millennials are getting into middle age now. But we certainly know a lot about the financial habits of both generations, given all the transactions that we see across all the different types of retailers. And I think first, I believe providing utility and ease of use matter more to these two groups than virtually anything else, including over having an established track record, which shows why they're starting to abandon, legacy financial institutions like banks, or being the cheapest option. For example, I don't think we see that being a huge motivator for these groups. It's really who's going to provide me the most utility and the best customer experience, the easiest to use. We see both groups willing to try new things as long as you provide those things to them, which I think shows, the rise of other platforms like TikTok or Shein, that have seemingly come out of nowhere to dominate the time of these generations. Gen Z is certainly fearful of credit card debt. They tell us that a lot. They grew up during the Great Recession, and I think that experience has jaded a lot of them in regards to debt in general, but specifically credit card debt. As I said earlier, they use BNPL to budget, but also to build credit, not necessarily because they can't afford to buy the things that they use BNPL to purchase, but because they view those as having high value, being able to build credit and to budget. They're also mobile native. I know I'm not breaking any ground here, but over 90% of our orders are via mobile device. So I think it's even more extreme than maybe retailers understand, with these generations and with BNPL. So payment integration in apps and via social is really important. Yeah, I think those are probably the biggest habits and trends that we see among those groups.
I think you made an interesting point too about that kind of hesitation around credit card usage and credit card debt in particular, and that's lending itself to a higher adoption rate of services like Sezzle. Is that kind of accurate, Paul?
That's exactly right. And, what we saw, again, when we started out Sezzle almost 10 years ago, millennials were adopting credit cards at, double-digit percentage points less than Gen X were at the same stage in life. Now, I think now that millennials are aging a little bit more, we're starting to see that pick up a little bit, not fully. And so I think part of it is more of a, pushing off the adoption a little bit or delaying the adoption, not necessarily replacing credit card adoption with BNPL, but they might get them a little later in life. And actually, I think around half, if not a little bit more than half, of our customers do own a credit card. But for them, it's not their preferred method of payment. They view it as something for emergency use, or if they want to buy something that's really expensive and need to use it. But again, now in those cases, we often see them using BNPL too. So I think we're seeing more of a mix. It's, people still have credit cards, but I think in many cases they're preferring to use BNPL or debit if it's a really low value purchase.
One of the things that is becoming more commonplace is when you're shopping online and you get to that checkout page and then the payment options are presented to you, there's oftentimes more than one buy now, pay later provider. One, I guess, maybe some thoughts on that trend in itself. And then second, any thoughts on, is there value for retailers in doing that, having these existing relationships with multiple providers? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think the reason for that transition is, when BNPL was nascent, when it was new, there was a big market share grab. And all the providers were going to retailers and trying to lock up exclusivity with those retailers, and would often include marketing incentives, signing bonuses, incentives of all types to get that exclusivity from the merchant. And those contracts usually had, call it 2-3 year terms attached to them. And then once the exclusivity ran out, the retailers viewed it as an opportunity to get access to a new customer base because each provider has its own loyal user base. A customer may have used multiple providers in the past based on what was available to them in checkout. But now all the providers are offering direct-to-consumer products via their mobile apps that allow customers to use those providers beyond just where it's offered in checkout. And so that has created loyalty. Even though I've used multiple, I have a preferred provider. So I think the proof's in the pudding. I don't think retailers would be adding more in large numbers if it wasn't working. And we've seen time and time again, when we are added alongside an incumbent provider, we're able to contribute a meaningful share of checkout to that merchant. And typically over half the consumers that we bring are net new to that merchant. So it matters. A recent payments tracker that I read said 70% of online shoppers will leave if they can't pay the way they want to. So payments becoming really important. So even if you offer one BNPL, it's not their favorite, they might still abandon, right? The other thing is, I spoke to this a little bit earlier, but, we each have different customer bases and different credit bands that we cater to. So if half of our shoppers have been declined by another BNPL, I think it stands to reason that if I'm a retailer, I'm going to want to offer multiple. So if they get declined by one, they have a chance to complete their order with another, right?
Yeah.
And I know that retailers don't like the idea of turning their checkout into a NASCAR. That's always the pushback around adding more payment methods. But I think there are ways that retailers can organize or group payment types together to reduce clutter. I've seen several retailers have like an accordion option where you can advertise buy now, pay later. They click on that and then it reveals all the buy now, pay later options they have. I think there's ways to make it more elegant.
Yeah. And particularly to your point earlier, about 90% of that coming via mobile devices, screen real estate smaller than on desktop.
Yeah.
So it's critical to kind of streamline that checkout process. But to your point, the option, you don't want to lose the conversion either. So,
Right.
so it's, you have to balance that and try to streamline where best possible. And in many respects, Paul, is it similar to, maybe they were having this conversation when they were offering multiple credit cards. Like, do we only offer Visa on, or do we offer American Express and Discover? Is, more payment options there? Is that kind of the conversations that may have been happening previously with credit cards are now akin to what's happening for BNPL?
Yeah. I think that's a good comparison. I wasn't around those early days of credit card adoption, but I'm sure that there was less penetration of certain cards at certain times. I think Discover even still has less penetration relative to Visa and MasterCard, and Amex the same for maybe different reasons. And I have seen tech providers whose whole business model is around payment orchestration and acting almost as a router so that they can funnel the customer to the right payment type or the right lender. There are companies like Charge After where they plug in multiple lenders and they do a quick pre-approval process and then determine which lender is most likely to give you the best terms and approve you and route you that way. So yeah, there's a lot of different ways to do it. And I think the technology will continue to improve to reduce the amount of friction in that process.
I want to talk a little bit about the consumer mindset and particularly what merchants can do to support those budget conscious shoppers. Obviously, there's external factors such as tariffs. There was a recently revoked 800 de minimis threshold for merchants importing goods. So there is sort of these external factors that might lead to increased pricing. As merchants are thinking about offering value and supporting their budget conscious shoppers, how does a company like Sezzle fit into that equation?
Yeah, I think adding BNPL providers like Sezzle is a great way retailers can increase affordability and access if prices need to go up. We used to speak with merchants about BNPL being a great solution to increase affordability without discounting. So if you don't want to discount, offer a BNPL and you're making your goods and services more accessible, right? I think the same applies if the prices need to increase. You're allowing your customer to spread that payment over time, and it makes it a little bit more digestible, right? I think 40%, we did a survey last month, 47% of our shoppers reported concern about inflation and pricing when we surveyed them. So it's certainly top of mind for our customers. I know Amazon got in trouble with Trump when they called out a tariff surcharge in their receipts. But honestly, I would do it in the name of transparency. I think, if in fact you are facing rising costs due to tariffs, I think your customer will accept a price increase a lot easier if you're transparent about it than if you just try to sneak it in there somehow. And maybe you'll face some backlash from politicians, but I think it's probably more important that you don't face backlash from your customers.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's kind of an interesting thought. I do remember that. And I would tend to agree with you in terms of the more open you and transparent and honest you can be with your customers about here's why this price increase is happening.
Yeah.
I believe the better off you are. One quick follow-up here, and maybe this is something you talk about with your merchant clients or retail clients. Do you hear, to your point about, installments and not wanting to be a kind of a discount heavy brand, and are they thinking about BNPL as kind of a margin protection tool? Is that something that you're hearing from?
Yeah, absolutely. Because, one of the big pushbacks from merchants, especially early on, I will say, I think the pricing for BNPL providers to merchants has come down in recent years as we've optimized unit costs and things like that. But, when MDR was higher or transaction fees were higher for BNPL relative to credit cards, for example, if for a retailer, a credit card transaction was maybe 3% of a transaction, and for a BNPL transaction, it was more like 5%. Well, if you compare that to a 20 or 30% discount on a sale, it's a pretty easy decision to make, right? Yeah. So I think it is a way for merchants to protect the pricing on their goods, but still allowing their goods to be accessible to more people.
I want to get your thoughts, maybe put on your forecasting hat a little bit. As we record this in mid-August and this episode is published, we're just about 100 days out from Black Friday. I think a little less, actually. Mm-hmm. So I want to get your thoughts on how you see consumer expectations evolving when it comes to their holiday shopping. What should merchants be thinking about as they're kind of busy, if not already started, which I think most already have, thinking about for that all critical Q4 season?
Yeah, we're seeing our shoppers start thinking about it earlier too. I think in that same survey I mentioned earlier, 20% of our shoppers said they've already begun their holiday shopping. So pretty crazy how it's now pushing into back to school, shopping season. But I think, in addition to seeking deals, which our customer certainly does, I keep going back to that value or utility word or thought. They're looking for free returns. They're looking for loyalty incentives. We've talked about mobile and app-based shopping being the predominant method. So I would certainly, if I'm a retailer, invest more in those channels to get this customer, especially during holiday season. Many of these shoppers are starting to originate their shopping journeys from the BNPL providers too. So, in addition to thinking about your own checkout, explore how you can be included in the holiday promotions of platforms like BNPL platforms or Rakuten or the other channels that these customers are now using to discover products and brands. Because I think more and more now, customers aren't going right to the merchant site to discover and to shop and to buy. They're hearing about it from, social media or from the payment app that they use. It could be a lot of different channels. So I think retailers should expect or should change their tactics to fit that expectation of the consumer.
It becomes almost another marketplace for the retailer.
Exactly.
Yep. I also wanted to, as a follow-up to that last question, as I think about it, and you talked about that holiday demand being pushed forward earlier and earlier every year. I wonder if there are a couple factors at play there. Get your take. One, tariffs and potentially increasing prices as we get closer to the
Trying
end
to
of
get
the
ahead of
year.
it.
Yeah, so trying to get ahead of that and get some of their holiday shopping done before those price increases hit. And then the other is kind of the emergence of, at first it was just Amazon Prime Day. Now all of these other competitors are popping up these kind of midsummer shopping events that
Right.
are maybe potentially drawing some demand away from Q4. Any thoughts there?
Yeah, that's a good theory. I think you're probably right, because now, as a consumer, I guess I would always be concerned that even during these summer deals, the holiday deals are always supposed to be the best deals, right? So I have a little bit of a FOMO of like, am I buying too quickly? Am I not going to wait till the right time? But I have to believe that for the planners out there, of which I'm not one of them, they're having their back of their minds, these are the people I need to buy gifts from. And oh, here's this great deal that I can't pass up. I'm going to take advantage of it and buy this gift for grandma or mom or whoever. So I think you're spot on, Joe. I think you're right.
I want to close with a kind of a theme you've talked a little bit about, Paul. You've used the word loyalty multiple times in our conversation. How do you think payment innovation and how do you see that influencing loyalty? Not just getting that one-time conversion, but getting that customer to come back again and again, rising online acquisition costs. It's so critical that you get, that repeat purchaser. How do you see payment innovation influencing that loyalty of the consumer?
I think it's huge. I mean, I think payments are no longer simply a utility to transfer money to a retailer or to a merchant. Payment companies like Sezzle, we're all building, and I hate the term, but we're building super apps where, you can find deals, you can send money to friends, you can get access to credit, you can build your credit, you can learn about personal finances, you can earn money for completing tasks like surveys. I mean, they're just becoming such dynamic platforms. And I think many customers are becoming loyal to payment methods and to shopping platforms, even more so than brands. We've added payment streaks, which is our branded loyalty program, which encourages, not only on-time repayment of installment loans, but also more frequent usage of Sezzle. I think I mentioned the valuable shopping features that we added so customers can find the best prices for items across merchants. So today, over a third of our transactions occur within our mobile app, and the other 2/3 are on merchant sites. When we started, it was, almost 0%.
Speaks to that discovery piece, right?
Exactly right. Yeah. So if you want access to our customer base and the customer bases of other BNPLs, other payment methods, because we're all adding this functionality and loyalty, I think you need to think about partnering with companies like Sezzle in more ways than just adding our payment method to your checkout. It's how can I get in front of their customer base? How can I market to their customers? How can I advertise with them? We're also becoming advertising platforms for these merchants. And if the merchant is willing to promote us to their customers as well on their site, it can oftentimes be a great win-win trade-off, right? Where, for many, many years, the way we acquired customers and other BNPLs was by having those merchants promote our services on their product pages and their cart pages, right? That was huge for us. Well, if they're willing to do that for us, we can commit to doing that for them for the term of the contract, featuring them in so many emails, so many push notifications, in our banners at the top of our app, things like that. So it can be a two-way street.
Yep. True win-win partnership. As we wrap up our conversation, first I want to thank Paul Paradis, the president of Sezzle, for joining us on this episode of Total Retail Tech Insights. I've learned a lot about Sezzle, but for those in our audience that want to learn a little bit more, in particular how your organization can help merchants, what would you advise them to do?
Yeah, I'd say please go to our website, Sezzle.com, and we do have a specific merchant page, Sezzle.com/merchants, where they can learn, all the different ways we can help them. And I think there's ways that you can contact us directly on that page. So we'd love to hear from you. We're investing in Q4 in a major way, looking for retailers to spotlight on our platform. So if you'd like to learn more, please go to our website.
Well, thank you for that, Paul, and thank you for taking the time to join me. Really enjoyed the conversation.
Thanks, Joe. I appreciate the platform.
Thanks for listening. For more information on this podcast, please check out our podcast channel page at mytotalretail.com/podcasts for show notes. Total Retail Tech Insights is available on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and Spotify. Make sure to subscribe on our podcast channel page as well. If you've enjoyed this episode, please take a few moments to rate and review this podcast. Thanks, and until next time, this has been Total Retail Tech Insights.